Welcome, everyone. This panel is going to share our experiences as teachers with using peer and self-assessment in online classes. And we're really lucky to have an excellent set of panelists who represent both diverse universities and diverse fields. And what we're going to do is each of us is going to briefly share our experiences with the class that we taught, and we'll leave lots of time for questions. Importantly, we all use peer assessment a little bit differently, and so in addition to multiple different domains, you'll get slightly different perspectives on how you can use it in a class. And I'm going to begin with a quick high-level framing of peer assessment, and I'm going to skip a lot of details to preserve discussion time. So if you're curious about the details, I put the URL where you can find a tutorial video that I put together along with code for analyzing peer assessment data and lots of other stuff online. I think there are a number of reasons to use peer assessment once my computer reawakens. So I'm going to restart, and while we're doing that, I have a rough sense of what I'll say. There's a bunch of different reasons to use peer assessment. One of them, obviously, for a MOOC is to be able to scale open-ended assignments of all different types to a large, massive class size. Another one that I think is at least as important is the ability to give students the learning skill of knowing how to assess other people's work. And I think for nearly any professional domain, the ability to know what's good and what's not is tremendously important. And so I think that's an important second reason to use peer assessment. And so the way that we started doing this was when I was going to put my class online about a year ago now, I told Daphne Kohler that, of course I'm not going to do the assignment portion of the class that I teach because that would be crazy, because we'd have to use massive peer assessment to be able to do that. And she said, well, we should give it a shot. And so we did. And the system that we used, which is now working again, great, is we created this peer assessment system, and Hui, who is here somewhere, who's right there, was one of the main developers of this system. And we're now beginning the third run of the HCI class. It's since been used in more than 20 other classes. And there are 3 steps to this process. It's a technique called calibrated peer assessment that we did not invent. And the way that it works is the first thing that you do when you go to assess peers' work is you go through a training phase where we show you an example assignment, you assess that, and then we give you feedback on how well you did. And you can go through that repeatedly until you get good, and then head out into the real world. You'll assess 5 peers, and one of those is an assignment that we have a staff grade for. And the staff graded assignment is key because that is important for being able to assess how well are people doing in terms of peer assessment. If you don't have some kind of gold standard embedded in there, it's difficult to know how well your peer assessment is going. You can use community TAs as to help grade with the assignments. So that for this run of the course, we've recruited 11 community TAs from the last offering. And people have employed this in a bunch of different configurations. The cornerstone of almost any peer assessment system, and this is not new for online classes, is to use a rubric. Here's an example of one for my design class right here. I've been teaching with rubrics for about 7 years. And I've put this example up at that URL there. In this rubric, each row is a category of student performance, and the cells represent a performance value for that category. So the peers grade on a category by category basis, and then you add them up, and that's the total score. The score that a student receives is the median of their 5 peer raters. And Daphne was the one who had the insight to use the median because it's extremely robust to outliers. One thing that I've found is that rubrics are extremely difficult to write in a way that is both clear enough to guide graders, but not so explicit as to feel Mickey Mouse or trite or prosaic. And for that reason, I've found that you need to revise them over several runs. And so if you get into peer assessment, you're committing to designing assignment-specific rubrics because students don't have the expertise to know how a general-purpose rubric about, say, good writing or good proofs applies in many different cases. You need to have it be assignment-specific. And also, you'll need to update those over time. The good news is that it works really darn well. So in our case, we're finding that about 60% of students are receiving a grade that is within 10% of what the staff grade would have been for that assignment. And in our case, where grades here are really used for over the entire course, did you get above an 80 or below an 80? It works out that basically everybody gets the right answer in terms of their certificate. And we've been able to improve this over time. And here is a scatter plot, which is a warning that if you do not include per assignment rubrics or staff graded ground truth or grading, the quality of peer assessment degrades dramatically. And you'll see that when there are several blog posts talking about how peer assessment doesn't work online. And they're talking primarily about courses that didn't employ these 3 essential techniques. The last thing that you can do is add feedback in addition to a grade. It'd be nice to be able to say something nice or constructive. It's hard to generate constructive things, especially if English is not your native language. But we can generate a set of general purpose snippets where for any particular rubric item, there are 8 or 9 pieces of feedback that cover 80 or 90% of the stuff. And we can hand those to students where they can just copy and paste them into a text field and then expand on them if they like. Students found peer assessment to be one of the most important learning experiences of the class. And there's a wonderful social psychological differential here where we see students value assessing their peers a lot and themselves a lot, but not quite as much. And if we ask, did you put enough work into peer assessment? Students say, oh yeah, I put a ton of work into assessing my peers. But my peers did not put quite so much work into assessing me. So going forward, and in the question we'll have time to talk about this, I think that the opportunity of putting pedagogy or a particular technique like peer assessment into software enables it to scale far more quickly than if we're all doing stuff in the private of our own classrooms. There's lots of opportunities in terms of adaptively improving grading. For the 3rd run of our course, we're doing that, of doing hybrid models for things like flipped classroom, and of enhancing the amount of feedback that you can give people. And you can think about how to use peers both online and on campus. I've put all of our source code for analysis up on this URL, and if you're interested in sharing your data, please contact me. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie Ferraro, and I'm with the University of California at San Francisco, and my subject matter is nutrition. So my approach was a little bit different than some of the other panelists, and as I'm sure some of your differences you'll see as well. We used in our nutrition class, we had a 6-week class and just finished offering it for the first time. So the peer review assessment tool was new to me. I hadn't used it very much in the past, but what I really liked about the opportunity to use peer assessment was that it gave me a chance to humanize the material that I was teaching. I taught an evidence-based nutrition or diet therapy course, which gets very ticky-tacky about numbers and studies, and which to a typical graduate student at UCSF would be completely appropriate. But I knew that there were students going into a nutrition class who want to talk about coconut oil and acai berries and their own individual personal dietary needs. So, after deflecting thousands of emails about what should I eat and this is what I'm eating, and I was becoming, they think you're their personal nutrition coach, kind of deflected some of that interest into the assessments. So we had, and I know you guys are probably not impressed by the numbers, but I put some of the numbers up because I do want to show that the overarching message here is that the students who did participate and complete all 3 of the assessments, 98% of them passed our course threshold, which was 70%. So we had at the end of this course 5,050 students who completed the course with a 70% grade or higher. In our class, I think the timing was unique in the sense that the signature track started at exactly the same time that our course started. So there was another level of interest. And also, just as an aside, we were able to offer continuing professional medical education for medical doctors, registered dietitians, and registered nurses in our class. So we're a graduate-only institution. And so, as we talked in the last course, trying to develop the community that you want in your class sometimes, we said till we were blue in the face that this was a graduate level course, and we had students wanted to talk about very, very intro level personal dietary issues. And the assessments kind of gave them the forum where they could do that. Our assignments were skill building, so they got harder as the course went on. And we had 3 different peer-reviewed assessments. And again, I use these topics as a way to humanize the material. In nutrition, people, it's human nature, they love to talk about themselves. So we let them talk about themselves in the assignments. In the quizzes, those were very objective, right or wrong, multiple choice. Essentially, we wrote them and we graded them, and there were right or wrong answers. But in the assessments, it was the chance for the students to really apply the information that they were learning to their own individual selves. So it was kind of, capitalizing on the low-hanging fruit, which was let you talk about yourself and your own personal dietary desires. So we had them do a one-day nutrient analysis as the first assignment using a program that you might be familiar with from the USDA called Super Tracker. Very relevant if you live and eat in the United States, wildly irrelevant if you live in Iran, as we saw. But we knew it was going to happen. It was a free tool that was out there. It was better than many of the other free ones. We had all the conspiracy theorists about the U.S. government telling you what to eat. It was a very interesting conversation, but we kind of went into it knowing that there would be a lot of challenges, and we worked some of them out, and we'll probably stick with that assignment or something close to it for the second one. In the second assignment, what we did was we kind of built on that and had the students build a one-day diet using the exchange system for diabetic meal planning, which is a little more advanced. It was certainly the case where we heard the same thing. I put a lot of time into reviewing my peers, but they didn't do as well as reviewing me, and I don't think my grade is fair. But really, the quality of work, especially at the kind of 2/3 way through the course, was pretty impressive, and it was reassuring to know that they were getting some of these concepts. The last assignment that we did, and I do this a lot in nutrition classes, is a virtual potluck. It was an opportunity for the students to talk about, in their own individual culture, how do they use food as a healing mechanism? So we might have the analogy of chicken soup to help when you have a cold here in the United States. But it was fascinating to see in different cultures around the world what's perceived to be therapeutic food, and tying it back to the evidence-based piece, is there really any evidence to support that? And if there's not, that's fine, but we just wanted the students to go through the experience of sharing that. And one thing this really helped with was to create this intercultural, multinational sense of collaboration, that I might be a student in San Francisco working on this, and there were certainly students from throughout the United States, but really the inputs from the international students was, I think, what was very, very rewarding for those who were involved in the peer review process to see. I struggled a little bit with the rubrics at the beginning. I didn't want to make it too Mickey Mouse, but at the end, our rubric ended up being, for our first attempt, pretty Mickey Mouse. It was 0 points, 5 points, or 10 points. You didn't do it, you halfway did it, or you really did it. And that was kind of how our rubric worked. So it was very straightforward, and I'd be interested in learning about some of the more developed rubrics, but you kind of want to take the path of least resistance for some of these things the first time you do it. So you can just see some of our rubrics up here. The font is small, but for example, for the exchange lists, list your meal plan with the exchange list. So from the fruit exchange list, or the carbs, or the fats, did they do it? Did they submit it incompletely? Or did they submit it completely? Was kind of the 3 parameters that we used. Just some pictures from our virtual potluck. This was probably, we really wanted to end the course on a high note. As those of you who've worked in these large classes know, you need to pat yourself on the back sometimes. It gets a little, after a time, people insulting your hair, insulting the rate at which you speak, you want to end on a high note. So it was, you guys do the work and share with each other. And part of the assignment was they had to upload a picture of their finished product of this therapeutic food. So this is a student, I believe from Bulgaria, who made a traditional national dish, ended up having a dinner party, invited all his friends over, and then submitted the final picture. We also got pictures along this lines of people living and cooking in really rural areas. I mentioned Iran, but there were certainly students from sub-Saharan Africa that got all the way through the class and made their therapeutic dish on an outdoor coal fire. So that was unique and interesting to see as well. A little bit about the numbers, of course, like most of the classes, we had some tapering off as the course went on, but we did retain over 5,500 students, and of the 5,700 students who completed all 3 assignments, the 5,700 who did, more than 5,000 of them passed the class. So I think that's something we would encourage in the future. You might struggle a little bit with some of these very objective, tedious, right and wrong questions in the class, but if they got through these assignments, we really saw that they did have another level of understanding that was certainly important as well. So again, of the 51 students, I guess, 5,100 who completed all 3 assignments, 50-50 passed. So we had 98% of students completing all 3 assignments also passed the class. And that was a very, again, kind of invigorating statistic to end on. And so just to finish with a histogram showing the normal grade histogram in our class of nutrition students, completing the assignments was essential to success in the course. We're still working on the data as to what percentage of the students who completed the assignments also succeeded with regards to the signature track and those who are seeking continuing professional education. But from our standpoint, it was certainly a learning experience. I really enjoyed the comment that Chuck made in the last session, was that with regards to writing the rubrics, if you write a bad one or you write a bad one on purpose, that sometimes can encourage student collaboration at a different level that, you'll get something out of it because they'll write a better rubric for you. So I would like to say we wrote bad rubrics on purpose. It was mostly my fault. But we'll be refining that in the future, and I'd love to see what the students can come up with as far as maybe some improvements upon our rubric. So that's all I have. Thank you guys very much.
And Laurie wasn't able to make it today, so we're going to move on to Carol.
Wow, you good. Okay, so I'll just push this little button.
Yep.
Okay, so this is from the Listening to World Music class, which I actually taught in July last year. So it is some time since I read all those peer-graded assignments, well, the pieces that came to the top. So I'm going to just talk through, give you some basic information on how we put how the assignment process worked. And pretty much I'm going to say, I have taught a lot online, and I had done discussion boards, but with much smaller classes. And I had asked Coursera at the time if we could do some kind of graded discussion forum. And then we moved to peer-graded assignments the night before I started teaching. So there was some confusion actually in the class right at the beginning about whether the discussion forum, the open discussion forum, was required, which I think actually made people post there a lot, because they still were not sure that this was no longer required. So I was a little bit caught between the two, not completely sure. So it took me 2 or 3 weeks to fully figure out exactly what the distinction was and to make sure the students understood it. But anyway, I think it was a really fabulous process, and now that I'm teaching, I continue to teach online. We're experimenting with it through Blackboard and Canvas this semester. It's not a straightforward process. I wish we had the Coursera platform for it. But I do think it's a really fabulous process. It's basically, I'm a complete convert to this idea. Okay, so the assignment process is essentially that you can submit it many times. You start the assignment, you can submit it many times until the deadline. This issue of the deadline was a big thing for students, because a lot of people thought, oh, it's free, I can do it when I want to, and suddenly there was a deadline, and it was I think they had hard and soft deadlines. I don't know what that meant, but it was the part of the language, certainly at the beginning. We just had one deadline. We also found that you could stagger deadlines so that you could finish writing your assignment, have the peer grading continue on for 5 or 6 days, but you would start the second assignment before the peer grading was finished. That was something I was very anxious about, but it actually worked really well. Because people are working. At first we had our deadlines quite compressed, and then people asked, please, I work, I can't do it, and a weekend wasn't necessarily the advantage. So we really did try to stagger perhaps over 10 days each assignment, and I did 5 assignments in 7 weeks. Just so that you've got some idea. So there were 5. Okay, so each question had multiple possibilities. You could answer different things. You can submit many times. And then you're given 5 other people's to grade. I used the ground truth for the most part. There was 1 week, I think, when the TAs and I both forgot to meet the deadline for the ground truth. But it still worked. It just was, it's better to have the ground truth there. So you grade 5 others, and you can self-grade your own. that's optional, but in order to get a grade, you had to grade 5 others, basically. So 5 is actually quite a lot to grade. I think some people felt that was quite a lot, but I think for the rigor of the peer grading system, it's a good number. Certainly that's what we were told. So this issue of deadlines was a little bit of a problem. And then when people got the grade, it was this thing, not only have I worked harder than others, but why did they assign that grade? So we actually added in, it wasn't there at the beginning, I think in about week 3, Pengwei added in a little place where you could say, I gave you this grade because you did this and you didn't do this. It was basically quite nice to give standard answers for non-English speaking people, but this did work. So, this is, again, it's always a little bit small, but here you can see what the peer assessment looks like. You do the assignment, evaluate your community, evaluate yourself, see your results. So here the instructions to students were to select and write 2 to 3 paragraphs on one of the following 4 questions. These will be peer reviewed. Check the rubric for peer evaluation so you know what we're looking for in terms of techniques and style. So our rubric was never about content. It was only about how you presented your material, what argument you made, what did you use secondary literature, did you cite it appropriately. So it was all technical. And actually, I think that lowered the anxiety levels for a lot of people. At first, people were like, how am I going to evaluate? That was a big question. How do I evaluate other people's content? And we said, no, actually, calm down. It shouldn't take you too long. Maybe 20 minutes once you've got that rubric in there. You know, it's 2 to 3 paragraphs. You should be fine. Okay, so those are some of the what it looked like. So these were kind of cultural questions. Mine was a world music and cultures class. So it was really the musical culture questions, far less than actual music listening questions, even though it was a listening to world music class. We did do one of the assignments was actually on a performance that was on YouTube, recorded at Berkeley of Tuvan throat singers. It was an hour and 45 minutes long, and we had questions that were at certain moments in the concert. So they had to actually attend a virtual performance and make sense of it based on what materials they had been given. Okay, so these are, the rubric for evaluation here. So we had a maximum of 10 points for each one. There were 5 requirements, and you could get 0, 1, or 2. And of course, here, as I've said to you, it's not really content related. So it's writing style. Did you address the question? What is the strength of the argument? Did you integrate a personal response to music with the critical thought? So we don't just want to know you liked the music. We want to know a little bit more about that response. And then, of course, the relevance to larger course themes. So how does what you are arguing have some sense? And then we had this one that was more music focused. And then the thing of student justification we've done. Okay, so our paragraphs really were about the big issues: copyright, cultural ownership in an age of globalization, etc., etc. People complained that we said, first we put in a word limit. That's what we were told by Coursera. And then we put a paragraph, and there wasn't a really good correspondence between word limit and paragraphs. And then anyway, people just wrote more. So the word limit, they got cut off at 1,000 words. The challenge for them, of course, then is how do you confine big ideas into 2 or 3 paragraphs. They complained about that quite a bit. So we just said you have to select your issue. You can't write about everything. How to integrate your listening with the thinking about music. So a lot of people could bring their own experience of listening to music into it, but that was really the challenge for a lot of people. And then I was surprised. They asked for a list of musical terminology. I put one up just that I kind of compiled for my students. Some people got so angry because the terminology was different from what they were used to in their country. So that was English is not English, in other words. Okay, but I'm just going to very quickly say that one of the advantages of the peer review process, this particular mode of learning and examining, is the global dimension to it, which is that I get you. So, for example, we had a conversation about apartheid and modernity at large, and it was issues of rupture. So talk about issues of rupture in your own family and how music has been the connective tissue. There were some amazing things written. So 5 other people would read those paragraphs, and really, it's just that thing of you've thought through the issues, and then how does somebody else speak to it? So this issue of examples from your own part of the world. You learn from your peers. And then what I found, this confusion we had at the beginning with peer graded stuff and the open discussion forums is that it often would spill over into the discussion forums, and there were some really amazing things. Like there was a white South African who'd gone into exile. We talked about Paul Simon's Graceland album, and he wrote like this much. I printed it out. Unbelievable about what it was like for him personally when this album came out, and the response of the talk about building community was really quite extraordinary. So I think I'm just about done. Oh, then what I did, it didn't work as well the first time because my TAs, I only had 2, and they were so busy still loading materials and sorting things through. I wanted them to read the top, 20 assignments and then give some feedback to the class. We had a couple of days when they did it with examples of good ones, mediocre ones, and not so good ones. So in addition to the ground truth, we provided a little bit more. And this is not really that important, it's just numbers. So I'm done.
Questions? Yes, sir, in the back.
Charles Severance, University of Michigan. Scott, I think you single-handedly made the certificates with distinction idea by having the 2 tracks. I don't know if anybody did that before you, but the studio track and the non-studio track. And I took from how you did that to make, there was a real value in certain situations, making the hardcore peer-graded assessments optional. Could you talk a little bit about how that formed your class?
Yeah, for me it came about almost accidentally because I originally conceived of the course in the fall of 2011 as just being lectures and quizzes. And then when Daphne encouraged me to try peer assessment, and we created this peer assessment system, there were naturally 2 tracks. And it's similar to several programming courses which have a quiz track and then a programming assignments track, and that seems to work really well. The other thing that we did, because our design assignments are open-ended, is you can come back and you can do a studio practicum track where you're not required to watch any of the lectures or do any of the quizzes all over again. You can just go another lap around the track of doing a user-centered design project. And we've had a number of people do that track. And so I think it works well. From your community panel, I think one interesting question is, do you want to have some kind of special community for the people that are doing the more hardcore part, the more serious track? That's a great thing for somebody to try. Yes, sir.
First of all, Scott, Katie, and Carol, thank you for the work. I mean, I'm very impressed. The question that I have, though, is a question between peer assessment and peer evaluation. You know you were going to get that question. I don't understand the difference in your methodology. So could you explain that for me?
Sure. So I'll give a short answer in this panel, and I'll let the others field best too. If this is a topic you're interested in, there's a fantastic book by David Bowd called Enhancing Learning Through Self-Assessment. And what we did in our peer assessment system is actually the last step of the process was that you assessed your own work. And I love doing that because students get in this doing mindset, they submit it, and they're like, wow, I did this awesome thing. Then they get into the grading assignment and they go, no good, and they go through 5 other assignments. And then they have to go back and grade their own, and they say, wait a minute, if that's my criteria, then I actually didn't quite measure up. And we've seen a pretty strong correlation between peer assessment scores and self-assessment scores. The web has more. I agree with, so the 2 things that peers can be most helpful for are qualitative feedback and numerical scoring. And you can do both of those while somebody's working on the assignment and also at the end. And I think different classes will make different choices about when they use each of those.
I agree that there is some crossover. I feel like I got into it, and half the time we were doing peer review and half the time we were doing peer assessment, and that, to do it in the second round, I would definitely look back and say, what are we really looking at here, qualitative outcomes, or that they actually because there's no right or way to grade. If I'm not familiar with Iranian food culture, I don't actually know if there's 15 grams of carb in that serving of starch, and you don't want to go take it to that level. So I agree, it is convoluted.
And I love what Katie did in her class, because you do get this wonderful kumbaya moment of seeing assignments from all around the world. And one bit of data analysis that we ran was my student Chinmay looked at whether students graded other students from the same country higher. And the answer is that there's a patriotism bias of about 7%. And you can pull out any of the countries and it holds robustly. Interestingly, the name of the student submitter by default is shown. And so we're running some experiments right now to try and tease apart. You can come up with a bunch of cool theories of what's motivating patriotism. Stay tuned for more results there. Yes, sir.
I had a question. I guess I'm just a little bit confused. At the end of the course, do the students get a letter grade with the certificate or a numerical grade, or how does that work?
That's changed. What is the current status of that, Noria? Do you know?
Number.
They do get a number. Yeah, they get a number.
And how do you assign that number? I understand the peer assessment, but is it the instructor that assigns the number, or? Yeah.
So the software, by some mechanism, whether it's automated assessment or peer assessment or whatever else, keeps a tally for all of your scores. And so you may have quizzes be worth 1/3 of the grade and assignments be worth 2/3 of the grade. It just gives you a tally that it spits out at the end, and that number goes on the certificate.
I guess I was just wondering, though, in terms of when you read a student's, a thread or something, you don't assign then a grade. That would be impossible to do, I guess, right? Okay.
No, our discussions that's a voluntary part of the course, although it would spill over for the assignments, but the assignment rubric is part of the larger course grading rubric, which, again, like many things in Coursera, you just make it up as you go. So pick a number. Ours was 70%, and that was passed, but that was an arbitrary number that for different classes might be different. And you weight the assignments different against the quizzes. I think it's all work in progress.
Just like a normal class. And I think in principle, grading for participation on the forums could be an extremely cool avenue, and you know what the benefits and drawbacks of that will look like. Yes?
Hi, Rebecca Stein from Penn. I have two questions. The first is, I'd like to hear what type of peer assignments people have given that are not verbal. I'm trying a graph, students loading graphs up, so I want to know what other experiences were. And the other question that I have is, how do you submit bad answers for your ground what did you call it? Your ground proofing?
You can write them yourself.
Truthing? For the truthing. Yeah. Because I beta tested my assignments with students, but they were all good students. So
I write the bad ones myself, just so that there's no bias whatsoever. This is my example. And again, there's interpreting what do you mean by cohesive or comprehensive. I mean, these are very subjective terms, especially if English is not your first language.
I don't think I could even imagine this type of mistakes that my students make. It's like learning a language. I have to imagine someone learning a language.
And for me, that's why I think buying into this as an iterative process is so important, because as Chuck found, you write these rubrics and they look great, and then they go out in the world and there's not a TA or a teacher to explain them. And sure enough, some of them are crummy or ambiguous.
I love the idea of having the students actually iterate the rubrics.
Yeah, that came. Chuck has done that, and we've done that also. We now post the rubrics in advance, and you have the opportunity to. You have the opportunity to ask questions and suggest alterations. So it's same motivation as what Chuck did, slightly different flavor.
Can you go back to my first question? So anyone here has experience with nonverbal
Do you mean like the visual, like if you're having them upload a graph, we came in, when we had for the potluck, we wanted them to have one visual, but I can't assume that everyone has an iPhone and the ability to take a picture and upload it. So we said it was okay if you found a picture online of the food, and maybe some of them would cheat and not make it and just upload the picture. And karma will come back to them. But as far as uploading, a graph, there are certainly limitations of do they have the accessibility to the software, and we just tried to make it as simple as possible. So there was no discrimination against people who might not have the same resources to upload a picture as opposed to writing an answer.
And we did it also, but it wasn't in the peer assessment, it was in the discussion forum, just as a way to get a sense of who was in the class. I asked people to introduce themselves and just give us a link to music in your region. And it was extraordinary. But
So I think you're seeing a couple of really diverse examples of what you can do.
But none of them have done what I'm trying to do.
So for my class, we did visual designs, and I think all of these are going to be different. That's right.
Monday, right?
So we did have visual designs that students were evaluating. Yes.
Kimberly Hagan from Emory University. I'm not germphobic. I have a cold. This is a public health moment. I'm teaching a course on HIV/AIDS, and it has become a course on plagiarism. Students are focusing so much energy on putting the essays, peer evaluations that they're receiving line by line into Google search engines to ferret out people who are copying just straight from. And in doing that have discovered that there are, in fact, sites with free essays on HIV/AIDS out there, and they're just turning those in as their own. But I don't really know. I mean, I find myself thinking how much. I mean, in my graduate courses at Emory University, I care deeply about plagiarism. In a MOOC in which I just wanted people to sort of get one step farther in their thinking about HIV/AIDS than they were when they started, do I actually care that much? The students just get so wound up about it. I mean, how do you deal with plagiarism?
I never realized how much I relied on Turnitin until I got to Coursera and didn't have it to do that for me. So I don't know what the plans are for plagiarism detection, but there's so many other things to worry yourself about that's going to explode your head without worrying about that I just couldn't get to that level to even care. So I admire you for even worrying about it.
I discovered that I cared about it less than the students did. And so they're handing out zeros on entire essays, and then students are writing me going, "Are you kidding? I got a zero on the entire thing because I forgot to put a reference down." I mean, I sort of think, well.
We essentially don't worry about plagiarism, and it looks like Chuck has an answer, and then we'll go to Mitchell, who I think had a question.
Yeah, so I've taught twice now, and the first time I had exactly the experience you did. It became a war about plagiarism, and the problem is I think we find a lot of people who are actually teachers in our classes, right? And so these teachers want to sort of like teach the world about their particular view on plagiarism, right? So you have a lot of plagiarism experts in the class, okay? And so what I had to do was I had to lay the law down about my view on plagiarism, which is a bit of a risk, right? Because then people are going to criticize you because you said, this is what I consider plagiarism, this is what I don't consider plagiarism. But I don't think I would have survived. The second time through the class, in my first welcome to the class lecture, I was like, this is what plagiarism is, this is what plagiarism isn't. You can cite Wikipedia, you do this, you do that, and I have a special rubric that talks about it, right? And I have a thing in every peer assessment that talks about my definition of plagiarism, so at least we don't debate what the definition was. Because that was the real pain. The pain was them wanting to fight with me and force their definition of plagiarism down my throat. My class is a freshman kind of class, and for those of us who've taught freshmen, actually teaching people what plagiarism is one of the learning objectives of many freshman classes. Not simply finding people and shooting them for violating somebody's view of plagiarism. And so I have had no problems in the second one so far because I laid the law down really clear, because one of my learning objectives is to teach people about plagiarism, not just catch them and shoot them.
And I think, Mitchell, do you still have a question?
It's more of a comment.
Go for it.
Okay. Mitchell Stevens from Stanford. Thank you, guys. It was a terrific panel. On this point of plagiarism at the end, it made me think of two modest proposals. One, because what we call things is so important in this new world. Could we relieve ourselves of the distinction between assessment and evaluation and just go straight to peer review, thereby likening what people are doing in this space to what professional academics do with one another all the time. And the second is, how might we have a cosmopolitan conversation like this one about the ethical and normative implications of evaluation, rather than and having it focused primarily on those aspects of evaluation, rather than the technical challenges of the enterprise, which, as you know, are very large. What would that kind of conversation look like?
It's in some ways your question is analogous to the talk after lunch today that pointed out that while the technical challenges are myriad, the policy and social and ethics questions are often the key ones. So I think that's a great comment. We are running short on time, and so to do that, I see there's there a hand in the back there? It's an easy way to silence hand. Yes.
I'm in your class, in your ACI class, first time, and you post. I hate talking much. And you post examples of student work. Is that the first time you've done that? And if it isn't, how has that affected the quality of the students' work?
So in my in-person class, every year I show examples of last year's work. And what I love about that is last year's good becomes this year's average. And it really ratchets things up in a great way.
Do you show bad work?
I have vacillated about showing bad work. I like Katie's strategy of self-generating it. I'd like to be able to show bad work. Currently, we aren't. We're only showing good work.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
Hi, Will Engel from the University of British Columbia. In designing these assignments, did you take into account student commitment and time as a ratio for time completing the assignment versus time to go through the peer process?
Well, I did in the way, as I said, with the way I scheduled things, because people complained. They just said, we just don't have this kind of time. You're going to have to. I mean, most people are working. I mean, certainly most vocal people are working. So you have to be very flexible.
I found that saying this should take you approximately 1 hour helped to put things in context, so you didn't get that. Of course, what everyone can do in an hour differs, but that seemed to help. Like, you shouldn't be dithering over this for a week, but also it shouldn't take you 2 minutes to cut and paste something from Wikipedia.
When I first taught my class, I was planning on doing weekly assignments like I do for an in-person class, and that immediately became clear that that was a terrible idea, especially when you have peer assessment, because then there are 2 deadlines for each assignment. So I now do 6 assignments over 9 weeks. And so when we have them due Sunday night, that seems to be a good time in general, because a lot of people do the work on the weekends.
I guess just to clarify that, is there a ratio that sort of surfaces if it takes somebody an hour to do an assignment, how long it should take them to do the peer review part of that assignment?
I didn't have that.
It's totally clear from the feedback that I'm getting that students value peer assessment but think it takes too long. And so one of the benefits of the adaptive algorithm that we're using in this run is that we can decrement the number of assessments from 4 till 3 and maintain high quality. And so I think it's essential, if you're going to use peer assessment, that you have the time be efficiently used. For my in-person class, I actually have students do self-assessment inside class at the end of studio, because that gives them a focused time where everybody's doing it, and it's not one more thing that they have to do that dribbles out over the week. Well, I wanted to thank all of you for coming and all of our panelists for really great and diverse presentations.